Well, Razorback fans, we know that today's the day as the Razorbacks will take on the number 1 Auburn Tigers. So we got to ask the question, what if they win? Let's talk about today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I'm also the host of Inside Arkansas Live, which you can catch every weekday starting at noon on Inside Arkansas and InsideArkansas.com. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Wednesday as my backdrop and my setup is a little bit different here today as I am live from Neville Arena. In fact, you see Charles Barkley's statue right behind me. That's just great. It's pretty cool, actually. And so I figured on a beautiful day, I know a lot of you are snowed in and dealing with all the winter weather back there in Arkansas, but it's beautiful here in Auburn for today as we know it's a big one for Arkansas to go on the road and take on the number 1 team in the country, the Auburn Tigers. I know that we've discussed this about so many different teams and the type of schedule that Arkansas's had. And also, by the way, if you hear any weird stuff going on in the background, just know I'm outside. So just be prepared for that. But, we talk about Arkansas and we talk about what they've been trying to accomplish since really the season started. Nobody really knows what to figure out with this team. Nobody really knows what to expect out of this team. It's just one of those things to where you're hopeful. You're hopeful that maybe they can turn a corner somewhere. You're hopeful that maybe they can figure things out. Yeah, you're just, again, being hopeful at the end of the day. And for this particular game and this particular matchup, and I mean this in the most complimentary way possible towards Auburn, I don't know of a team that Arkansas has faced in the regular season that is as good as the Auburn Tigers this year. I mean, maybe back when Cal actually had those Kentucky teams that were undefeated, the ones that made it to the Final Four, that literally was beating everybody. Maybe that team, or the Anthony Davis team that won a championship. Like, those might be the ones that come to mind as far as anywhere close to this. But the Auburn Tigers are quintessential, without question, 100% the best team in the country, and nobody's even close. I mean, you saw what they did this past Saturday against the Alabama Crimson Tide, who was the number 2 team. And I don't know if Alabama's the second best team in the country. I know they're definitely a top 5 team, but, are they as good as what that was? I mean, is that going to be a preview of the national championship game later this year? Probably not. But Auburn is that team. They are on pace to break the record for the most Q1 wins ever by a team. I think the record's 14, and they're probably going to have 17. They're just going to shatter that record. They're, coming off of those big wins. They've only lost 2 games this year, one of them being on the road to Duke, who's really good, and the other one being at home just a few weeks ago to Florida, right here in this building, and which Florida is a really good team. In fact, the number 2 team in the country. So it's not to say that they are unbeatable, but it is to say that they are, without doubt, a team that takes care of business, that has a lot of different ways of beating you, that has never, it's not like, they haven't seen a team like you have. They have. They have faced the best of the best of the best all year long, and they have continued to find ways to come out on top. So I didn't want to turn this into an Auburn podcast, but that's just the reality that they are that team. So if you are Arkansas and you're a team that's coming off of a rough, frustrating loss to Texas A&M, a game that maybe you probably should have won or felt like you were in a position to win, what do you do for that? You're 4-8 in conference play, all right? You're going into this arena, which is going to have a whole lot of atmosphere and energy surrounding it. No one's expecting you to win. I mean, nobody's expecting anybody to beat Auburn, but they're surely not going to be expecting you to go in there and find a way to upset them. So if you're looking at everything, if you're Arkansas, like, what's the problem here? Like, house money, as they say? What do you have to lose? I mean, if you get beat by 5, if you get beat by 10, if you get beat by 15, even 20, is anybody going to sit back and be like, man, I cannot believe that Arkansas did not perform well against the number 1 team in the country in Auburn? Is anybody going to be freaking out saying, well, there goes the NCAA tournament chances? How do you expect to get into the tournament if you can't even beat the number 1 team in the country in their home arena? Like, no one's going to be saying that, or at least they shouldn't, and if they are, they're idiots. But the question I continue to ask anytime Arkansas goes up in these games, and especially this one particularly, I did it with Alabama a few weeks ago, is what if Arkansas wins? Like, what is that going to mean? What is that going to mean for the program? What is that going to mean for Cal? What is that going to mean for you as Razorback fans? What is it going to mean? Well, let's just break it down. And you can call me over dramatic. You can call me a little bit over the top, which I've never been accused of, obviously. But if Arkansas was to win this game, it would be such a monumental win that you really couldn't even put a price on. Well, for one, you'd be for sure in the NCAA tournament. You know, any of that bubble talk nonsense, no. You're in. You're an NCAA tournament team. And barring any sort of disaster, which, I mean, let's just live in somewhat of a reality. Let's try to be a little bit somewhat hopeful. You would win a few more games on top of this one. There's a chance that you could even get into that 9-10 seed range, depending on what the rest of the season holds, depending on what you do in the SEC tournament. I mean, there's just a lot of different things that could happen from that. So obviously, that's the key, and that's the number one thing, is you get into the NCAA tournament, you don't have to worry about anything else. But on top of that, and a lot of you may disagree with me on this, and that's fine. That's what makes a discussion. But at least in my lifetime that I've been watching Razorback basketball, that I've been covering Razorback basketball, of all the incredible wins that they've had, of all the ones that they've had upsets of them, or the intensity, or anything like that, to me, this would be the greatest regular season win they've had that I can remember. I mean, again, you beat Auburn just a few years ago when they were number one in Fayetteville. We all remember that, which we'll talk about here in a second. I can remember you doing that. And then, of course, Auburn went on to be a 2 seed that year. I think they lost in the second round to Miami. But even though they were number one, I'm not saying they weren't a good team, because they were. They were very good, and they were worthy of being that number one ranking. However, no one really saw that team, at least at the point in time that game was, and saying, oh, yeah, this is far and away the number one team in the country. Like, nobody was really saying that, because it was just about maneuverability. It was about timing. You know, oh, well, who lost in front of you, who gets that spot, and who gets put up there. It was really all about that. But that's not the case here. There's no other, like, oh, well, Auburn just became number one because so-and-so lost, and they just happened to get a win. No, like, they're number one because they are the best team. And very few times do you have those opportunities to play a team like that. And especially in the case of Arkansas never really having that type of thing happen, not really having that type of win, at least in a long time. So that's number one. And then to take it to another step, doing it on the road. We see upsets happen all the time in college basketball. We talk about home court advantage. I mean, there's so many cases where Arkansas, we'll use Arkansas as an example since, you know, this is Locked On Razorbacks after all, where you've had games that really went your way because of your home crowd, your atmosphere, the Bud Walton magic that's been a part of it. But how many times did you see those games and you watch those games, and be real about it, folks? How many times did you watch those games and those upsets and be like, oh, yeah, Arkansas would have for sure won this game even if it was in the opposing team arena. Like, they won in Bud Walton, but if they would have played it at their arena too, they for sure would have won. If some of you have said that, come on now. Like, let's be real. Like, most of the time, it's just like you understand what home court advantage means, and you understand the importance of it. But to do it in going into somebody's arena like this, in a very hostile environment, and pulling it off, it just, again, would be that level. And on top of all that, a lot of you would probably say, well, derp, Florida did it. You just mentioned it a few weeks ago. I did. But as I said before, Florida is a top 5 team. And they've proven to be a top 5 team. Arkansas is not. They're nowhere close. They're not a top 25 team. Folks, they're barely a bubble team. So you got to also take into consideration where you're at, how you've been playing, especially coming off that A&M game, and then taking it to that next step of you, like, taking care of business in that. I mean, it's unfathomable. I don't know exactly what the spread's going to be at. I assume it's going to be double digits, maybe even 15 points, something like that. But it seems fair. Like, I'm not going to have any sort of issue with anybody picking Auburn. I'm not going to have any issue with anybody not thinking Arkansas can win. I'm not going to have any issue with the amount of points that people think Arkansas is going to lose by. I'm not going to have any problem with that, because it's just, I think Auburn's that good. And I think Arkansas has been struggling that much to where on paper and going into it, you just can't do it with full confidence and full faith that it's all going to do that. Like, I can't do that. Maybe you can, but I'm not going to do that. So all those things involved, it's truly a David versus Goliath type of thing. But I don't even know if Arkansas is as, does Arkansas have what David had? I don't know if anybody knows the ins and outs of the story of David and Goliath, not to get biblical on you. But the thing that David had and what he was able to do is, people remember, okay, well, he had he had a slingshot, and 5 smooth stones that he gathered from the brook. Because they tried to get the armor of a warrior on him, but he was too small. He's too weak. He couldn't hold it all. So he's like, I can't fight in this. So I'm just going to go by the creek, and I'm going to get it, the little stone, and that's all I need. But the thing is, that's not what the point of the story was, is that he was able to defeat somebody because he had rocks. It wasn't just the rocks. Folks, it's because God was on his side. That's how he was able to do it. Not to get too biblical, but just stay with me on this. He had God on his side. He was able to take care of business in that way. And again, going deeper into the story, when he slayed Goliath, he, of course, cut his head off and everything. It gets pretty graphic. But how many stones did it take for him to hit Goliath and knock him down? Just took one, right? At least that's what the scriptures say. Just one. So why'd he gather 5 stones? If God was with him, why do you only gather 5 stones? Why do you need 5 stones? Why not just use the one? Here's the point I'm trying to make, folks. You can believe that you have something going for you where you have something on your side. You can believe that you got a Hall of Fame coach. You can believe you got D1 athletes that are going to take it to the NBA draft and be great players in the NBA. You can believe that you have the athleticism and all that. You can believe all of those things. But at the end of the day, even with all those things, you have to make sure you are prepared to take it on. You have to make sure you have everything you need to be able to take on something and be able to take down someone as incredibly gifted, as incredibly tough as the Auburn Tigers. You have to have your own ducks in a row. Arkansas did not have their ducks in a row against A&M, and that's what cost them the game. They cannot go in here unprepared. They cannot go in here making their own mistakes. 17 turnovers, having missed layups, having just dumb things happen. Because Auburn, even when if they played their D game, they still are good enough to beat you if you don't play your A game. I don't like moral victories, and I'm not going to bring up moral victories because I don't believe in moral victories. So I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, well, if Arkansas only loses by this amount, it's going to be okay. But I'm telling you right now, I'm going to have a completely different feeling if you told me that Arkansas loses by 8 points. But there's 2 different versions of the game that go down. One version is about Arkansas playing really well and having a back and forth, and it's close. But at the end of the game, Auburn starts hitting their free throws when Arkansas is running out of time and they lose by 8. Or Arkansas loses by 8 because they shot 30% from the field. They had 15-plus turnovers. They couldn't make the easy layups. And also they had a game in which some of their best players did not come prepared. Both are 8-point losses. Both are losses, but not all of them are created equal, and a lot of them are going to have us feeling different ways. That's my point. So I know I've been a little long-winded here, but Razorback fans, you have nothing to lose. Nobody believes you're going to win this game. And if you lose, it is what it is. But if you want to take down the Goliath, you got to make sure your affairs are in order. You got to make sure you're good to go. Because you can't just walk in here and expect to win if you don't play your A game. Play your A game, and it's going to be a fun trip home here from Neville Arena. We're going to recap and look back on that Arkansas-Auburn game, the last time that they were number 1 in the country here in a second. So stay with us on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. All right, folks, this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering if you were ever going to get your money back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed. All while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Go get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, so moving on into the next segment of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Again, I'm outside here of Neville Arena with Charles Barkley behind me and everything. It's like the only player of note that really came from Auburn. Also, I'm going to make fun of them a little bit because you can't see it over here. I would move the camera, but it's going to mess up everything. But I like giving them a hard time because they have their Final Four banner from 2019 like in big old bold letters out here. And it's like, that's nice. But I guess that's the only thing they have in basketball is one Final Four banner. It's neither here nor there. But still, I wanted to bring back up because it was mentioned about Arkansas playing Auburn back when Auburn was #1 in Bud Walton Arena back in 2021. And obviously we know Arkansas won that game in overtime. And they stormed the court and everything. It's incredible, though, when I look back on that game and to think about the amount of things that came from it or the memorable things from it, dealing with Arkansas and the difference that it made. First off, obviously, the game itself. You played in the middle of the week. It's on a Tuesday night, I believe. I think it was a Super Tuesday late game, which I hate. It seems like all the great games that Arkansas has at home are not on Saturdays, although Alabama was, but still. I remember being a midweek game. A lot of people made the trip, and the crowd was incredible. I mean, the student section was as lively as it's ever been. You had fans that were coming all over the place, 20,000 plus that were there. It was a whiteout, and I just remember everything was building. And the reason that it built is obviously because they were #1 in the country, but the reason it built is because you still believe that you had a good team too. You still believe that you had something going for you. And you also believe that Auburn was beatable. And I remember going through that and remembering just how much anticipation I had. I didn't know if Arkansas would be able to take down Auburn. However, because it was at home, because it was at Bud Walton Arena, I had faith. I was like, hey, anything can happen here. Anything can happen here. But I just remember the atmosphere and the energy being at an all-time high. And I remember when, Arkansas was trying to, kind of fend off some guys that are really good for, or I should say bad, matchups for them. I think back to just like, Jaylen Williams being really the only big man that they had and how many dudes that Auburn had too, just that could make shots at any given time. It just seemed like on a paper it wasn't a great matchup for the Hogs, but they kept with it, and a lot of it had to do with J.D. Notae just being that dude. But it was a back and forth game. No team really took the reins and took ahead, and Arkansas had some big shots, and it goes into overtime. Or I remember that. I think it was in overtime, I think it was in overtime, that Arkansas's got Auburn's big man. I've been sitting here trying to remember his name. It just blanked on me. I know it's not Cody Zeller, although I messed that up on the Inside Arkansas Live. But Walker Kessler. Yeah, I knew I'd get it. But I remember he was like one of their best players. And he fouled out of the game. Now, I was there at the game, so I didn't know this at the time. But when he fouled out, some of the players like Notae and everybody kept playing. And as the broadcaster said, it's so loud in here that you can't hear the whistle. And I remember watching the highlights and remember that moment. I'm like, yeah, it was that level. And it feels like it's been so long since Arkansas has had something like that. But I remember it was obnoxiously loud and intense. And just back and forth. I remember that. I remember J.D. Notae hitting a huge three to really put Arkansas ahead and stick with it. I also remember Arkansas, again, going back and forth with it, but hitting some clutch free throws at the end. I think there was a time where maybe it was Aldis Toney missed the free throw, and it was Jaylen Williams, I think, hit it back out, and they rebounded it and got another chance at it. I remember that. I remember, all these things about that game. One of the funny things, though, is I also remember Muss with his shirt off, with his sling, because remember he had his surgery, and he's there dancing in the middle of the court, and he had his sling on, and Whistle Lang was trying to talk to him in the tunnel after the game while people were storming the court, and it was a chaos, it was madness. They turned the lights out. I never understood that, why they turned the lights out as soon as Arkansas won. I was like, that's the stupidest thing you could have ever done. But that, and then again, we could sit here and reminisce about the game and about the moments that we all are where we were, if you were at the game, what you remember, and if you were on the court and all that. But let's get to the real point and real thing of what they did and what it was that everybody remembers. It's Wendell Johnson, or Wendell Green, not Johnson. Wendell Johnson, or Wendell Green. I keep saying this name, Wendell Johnson. Wendell Green. There was a time at the end of the game where Arkansas had basically beaten Auburn, and Arkansas got the rebound, and Jaylen Williams threw it out to Devo Davis. Just to kind of end it, and Devo was going to do some little flair. It wasn't something like he was just rubbing it in the face of Auburn, but he was going to do a bounce dribble and get it up and alley-oop it to himself and dunk it home. Again, it wasn't anything trying to rub it into their face or being cocky about it. And it didn't even count. It was nothing like that. But Wendell Green saw that, and he just takes off running at Devo. Just takes off running at him, thinking that he was going to block it, which he wasn't. And then when he runs over there, he's such a short little fella. When he runs over there, Devo dunks it and swings back. And, I mean, Devo's crotch was right in his face. And the memes happened forever. Forever. And that's something that, like, you can always remember and have some fun with in that. Maybe you would have fun with on today's game. But that was also a really funny moment, and one I'll never forget, because the memes and then the stupid Super Bowl talk started from all of that. Again, it's just so much. It's amazing. That was a regular season game, and it was big because you beat number one, but there's just so much that happened from that game, because of that game, when that game happened. I mean, it just went on and on and on. So to see all that and to see where it's at now and how things have changed or not changed, it's been awesome. But who knows? Maybe Arkansas can do it again. Maybe Arkansas will find a way to do it again. Probably not. But hey, we've seen crazier things happen, right? Sure. We'll get to our final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast coming up next, so stay with us. All right, so final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. So again, I'm here from Neville Arena in front of Auburn. It's looking at Jordan-Hare Stadium, actually football stadium there. Yeah, whatever. But I'll tell you this, like, it's amazing how the SEC has continued to be just such a strength in college basketball, and it's almost a weird thing. It's almost strange. And I had somebody ask me about it because, for instance, last night, the Cal documentary, Razor's Edge, which was incredible. If you haven't seen it, check it out. Episode 2 was about the Kentucky game. And it was the behind the scenes on. I'm not going to spoil it for everybody, even though everyone knew what happened in the game. But as far as the documentary, as far as behind the scenes for Cal and everything, like, that was awesome. And that was awesome to see. And to see, like, the background of everything and how things were approached and how he handled things, all of that was so great. And, his approach to the players and how much it meant to him and how much that game meant to him, it really, really approached to some epic time. So I just want to say, if you haven't watched it, it's on Vice. You can check it out if you have Hulu Live or Sling or whatever it is. I mean, there's different ways to watch. You watch it online even. So check it out if you haven't. But appreciate each and every one of you listening and watching into the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter at John Nabors Show for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. We'll keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll see you.